All right, I'm with my buddy Zach Rockford. Rocky, it's been 10 plus years of us being friends now, and I've always wanted to do a podcast with you. I feel like every time we talk shop, it's a very good talk, and so now finally the world gets to hear our madness. We have no agenda today, which is awesome for me. This is the first time I'm doing an open mic kind of interview. But I will say, let's start with you introducing yourself, talk about your journey, and then we'll get into our ramblings, my friend.
Yeah, so first off, thanks for having me. Journey itself started at a private facility in Davenport, Iowa. Acceleration, it's a high-speed treadmill facility. I got to intern there prior to the job, and so I was a likely candidate to just be brought on, especially when we were low staff. So ran that facility for that spring, and then that summer is when we met at TCU in 2014. Spent 3 months at TCU, and then I had a graduate assistantship down at UIW, which is Incarnate Word in San Antonio, Texas. I spent 2 years down there, really just working on the craft of all the stuff we learned while we were at TCU and applying it, and just like any graduate assistantship, just really trying to hone in on what do I know, how do I know it, and just kind of all those ebbs and flows of the job itself, and just battling long hours, class, lack of sleep, you know how it is. But also probably the two best years of the start of that career path for me, because it really challenged you to know if you're going to stick this out. From there, I went to Arizona for a fall internship. Worked with both sides of Olympic and football. I'd never done that before at a bigger school, so the experience was great. And then pretty much had no job when I left home. $200 in my name. Went home, just kind of networked, threw out some resumes and a couple just emails to any director within probably a 2-hour radius of home back in Springfield, Illinois. Just looking to pretty much get my name out there, meet who's in the area. Yeah, just had really nothing that I could do at this point in time as I was job searching. And so took a couple visits at some schools, one being SIUE down in Edwardsville, Illinois. And within probably 20 minutes of talking with Mark Jameson, he offered me a part-time position. Fast forward from being part-time to full-time to all the way elevated to director over the course of pretty much 5 years, working with all the sports we had there and really diving into, building a culture, building a department with him was really great. That was probably the catalyst to I think my career, was meeting him and things we wanted to do, being around like-minded people that constantly search for, we could do this better. And then just try to tease out how we do that. And then really just going about it in a way that makes sense. And then that you can correctly articulate to people and kind of show your vision and mission. I really got to see that through during my 5 years, which then landed me the job here at University of Montana as the director of athletic performance. And I've been here since August of 2022. So coming up on pretty much 16 plus months. But yeah, it's the journey's been crazy. It's super weird because baseball has always been the thing I love. I worked in baseball. I played baseball from young until pretty much college, where I couldn't play anymore. Arm was shot, and I probably wasn't good enough, to be honest. And so I played football, and then football is pretty much the thing that got me my first job within strength and conditioning. But that's probably been the most weird, is not being in baseball the last since I've been here in Montana, because I was in baseball since I was at TCU on the strength and conditioning side, and it has its own pieces to it that you all love, enjoy, and hate at the same time. But yeah, spring's a weird time for me because I'm just used to ramping up with baseball, like in that January, February time, and I don't have that now. So that's been an interesting piece.
So anybody that's followed me obviously knows I've been doing the PBS CCS podcast, so I've pretty much only talked to baseball. So part of this for me is not talking baseball. So I know you miss it, but I'm gonna cut us off to not talk baseball if we can. If it comes up, it comes up. Like I said, we don't have an agenda here,
Mm.
but some of the best conversations we've had over the years were when you were with Mark out at SIUE, and a lot of them have revolved around like K box, flywheel training, and I think I probably want to start there with you and just kind of talk about that. And you say that, when you were there, you were trying to do things better and you were trying to articulate them appropriately to people. Like, what does doing things better look like? Does that include K box stuff? Is it like, systematizing like return to play? Like, what was do this better, and then how did the K box fit into that big picture with you? And are you still using it at Montana, or have you kind of just realize you don't want to do it anymore?
No, let's talk through that and then keep me on task too while I do
Okay,
this. So let's
I
start
can
with
do that.
kind of the doing things better. I think we always hear you don't want to pour square pegs into round holes, right? You start thinking through like some of these different things with like squat patterns and stuff like that with a lot of athletes. I think the hips and the shoulders probably the things that get banged up the most because we probably force them in the positions that they that we think they need to be in. With a lot of barbell training, it's a lot of fixed movements, so to speak. And so it's not that you don't do those, it's just how do you get into those? So if we look at the squat, right? It's simple like creating hip flexion, knee flexion, ankle dorsiflexion. Okay, well, that's the goal. How you get there doesn't have to be back squat, right? And so looking at it from that lens means okay, I have options now, right? Back squat's probably the most efficient way to train the squat if you want to get heavy, or you want to move fast, you want to jump with the bar, whatever it is, right? But starting their day one with one coach and 36 athletes, that's kind of difficult to do and have an efficient training session, right? So, um, kind of coming full circle, we progress the squat over time. Kind of give you like athletes like landmarks to hit as far as loads. Those loads progress naturally to the next progression, and then move forward. Now, with that, right, there's that learning curve of movement competency, right? If you look at multiple people, I don't think anyone's going to deny that piece of it. And then ultimately, you're looking at the squat to improve lower body strength. That's the grand scheme of it. You can't really improve strength until you learn the movement. If you squat once a week for 16 weeks, you only squat 16 times. Like that's really not that many times. Especially if we get kids in that have been trained quite a bit through their middle school all the way to high school into college. So are you undoing a lot of bad patterning, things like that? And as we know, the squat itself, like what's the transfer of training really of it? And pretty much all you're doing is you're trying to improve force production and absorption. So that kind of pretty much gathers how I view lower body barbell back squatting or any squatting variation, right? It's just to improve the force production or absorption. So typically when you look at the say any barbell movement, you're most concerned typically on the up portion, right? On the concentric portion. Well, we know the eccentric side probably dictates the concentric output because of the muscle's basic biological or biology or physiology. Well, with the K box, for us, we can overload that eccentric side, which inherently should improve the concentric output on the back end, right? The cool thing with the isoinertial training or the K box itself, it's easy to learn. And so low hanging fruit there is you could quickly figure it out. Your better athletes figure it out faster, and the reason why is typically better athletes know how to switch from eccentric to concentric faster, right? They have better stress shortening cycles, and they just have better rhythm. And so a lot of times when your athletes get on the K box, they're like, "Oh, I like this. Like this feels nice." And it's because it's very rhythmic, right? Now the only time they don't like the K box is if they're like really, really like weight room driven. Like I need more weight on the bar. That's probably your biggest issue that you run into. And there's nothing wrong with that. But once again, we need to view it as force into the ground. Now let's look at it from the eccentric side again. If I can improve the eccentric side of force, absorption, so to speak, I can then improve the concentric force or the production side. Therefore, I could improve the ability for me to change direction better, jump, and sprint. Probably the three things that truly matter in sport, especially team sport athletes more than anything else. Um, so we have low barrier or low hanging fruit, right? It's easy to learn, it's rhythmical, and it still deals in force over time. Um, the other thing is you can non-axial load it. So if you're worried about low back, shoulders, whatever it is, we now have an option for flywheel training that doesn't necessarily impede or exacerbate any issues you might have. And we're training the lower body strength side of things. The other thing with the K box is the footprint's very small. So a lot of times non-axial loading looks in the form of leg press, looks in the form of pitch shark, things like that. Those are massive machines. Now, I think they're great. I love the fact that we have them here and I love using them, but the square footprint of them is a lot bigger than the K box itself. And I would assume the price point's actually more for those other two pieces of equipment than a K box. So now kind of the background of it is rhythmic, right? Force absorption is the peak side of the quality that we're looking to train because it can improve concentric output. And then overall, athletes tend to like it better. And so the RPE we found is also lower too at certain force outputs relative to barbell squatting. So the perceived exertion is actually lower, which hopefully means the internal load is actually less as well, even though the force output is relatively similar. So you have a lot of benefits that kind of explain there. So like building that out, I think is probably the more important piece. I think the first part of the K box that we looked at was, okay, who needs to use it? Well, return to play athletes typically, like if you have, we had a couple of wrestlers and baseball athletes that had some shoulder, elbow, and like surgeries. So those are like your first people to use it, right? And so you use your top two patterns. You use your bilateral squat and you use your unilateral split squat. And you load them accordingly, just like you would any linear periodization, higher volume, lower loads, and increase from there. And at the time we didn't have force plates, and so we used jump mat to determine like pretty much power, like your jump height would dictate that, and then you would use RSI to dictate the stretch shortening cycle. So we had these athletes in return to play doing those two, and their power outputs were better on both of those than people that were training with barbell training. Now, in return to play, typically you can control more variables than you can with the rest of the team. So take that with a grain of salt. So that was the first iteration of it. And I was like, okay, cool. So then we applied a case study to baseball and softball at the time. We did a concurrent group. Everyone did pretty much, no, we had the barbell only and then the K-box only group is kind of how we separated them. So how we determined that was with baseball and softball, you have a lot of pars fractures, things like that, in the low back, just general hip discomfort, or if someone can't get into a position, like it just doesn't look good. We might do like goblet squat versus like front squat or barbell squat. So still train the pattern of squatting from a learning standpoint, but then train the quality of like strength, like output side on the K box, if that makes sense. So still chasing, we would eventually like to get back to just barbell training, right? Because we know it's very efficient was the idea, and then supplement a lot of the outputs or the force absorptions and productions via K box because of non-axial loading allows them to train, everything like that. Well, then we looked at RSI as a means to try to quantify these outputs and counter movement jump. And the outputs, I think it was like 8%, 18% improvement with those on K-Box compared to 18% better with K-Box than it was with barbell training. You're like, oh, well, that's a relatively big improvement. And then we got to the point where like, okay, I don't care what pattern you're on, you're just going to K-Box as well. And so we saw it as, okay, let's use it as a supplemental piece to improve the rate of eccentric loading. Because you're not going to like drop off a box with a barbell. You're just not going to do that. inherently very dangerous and stupid, right? Um, so you can't really overload the eccentric side from a fast standpoint, and we know fast eccentrics produce a higher concentric output. So now you're really starting to look at like physiological traits or things you're trying to accomplish. And ultimately, you're trying to prepare the tendon and tissue to absorb and produce those forces. So if you ever have to get into like a speed or power block, whatever reason, at least you're more robust to handle those demands and hopefully be a little more resilient to those outputs. Um, so yeah, I mean, when we started just adding K box into the sessions themselves, um, a lot of this happened during COVID. So like you could see like this is kind of took years, and as a department, we kind of all not abided by the same rules, but all kind of were like, we need to take a deeper look into this. Now maybe we've had a lot of good strength coaches at the time. Maybe during COVID, our department just handled workload a lot better, right? There's a lot of things. We had, I believe it was, you can count on one hand the amount of soft tissue injuries we had during COVID. During a 9 month span, I think is what it was. We had very minimal amount of soft tissue injuries, mainly because you can't practice that much, right? Which allows us to train a little bit better. So your readiness is there, but you're prepared for the demands because now you can't practice outside of what the body's able to do. And that pretty much is kind of where we finished off at. For the most part, that's when isometric training really started to kind of come into play. And we started looking at like, hey, this athlete really can't do intense bilateral loading through full ranges of motion, whether it's a hip, knee, or ankle issue. I don't know. Okay, so how do we get force outputs to be really high? Isometrically load, overcoming isos. How do you train the tissue to be resilient in terms of the eccentric side? K box. Now, from a range of motion standpoint, a lot of single leg, full range of motion things prepare the tissue to get in those ranges of motion. So now you're pretty much ticking all boxes, so to speak, in terms of a full, I guess, training parameter or things that coaches are looking for. You're just going to get it through a couple different variations versus back squat, full range of motion, right? Things like that. And so that's kind of where it fits in for us, or it fit in for us at SIUE. And we had force plates at the time to really start to, test a couple of these things. The issue was the force plates, when you put squat on force plates, it reads it as an eccentric load first, because you start from the top, right? You start the force plates and then it absorbs the eccentric side, then you have the concentric. Well, with the K box, you have to wind the wheel up, and then the first movement is actually concentric. And so it would throw off what was eccentric and concentric, and we were getting these super high spikes, and we were like, what is going on? It was the eccentric loading that it's occurring, but it was happening in the alternate phase, so to speak. And then now I think ForceDex has changed that so you can actually use isoinertial training and you can actually track it over time to look at it, because that was one of the issues we were having. But yeah, super crazy to think about. And I think no one believes it until they try it. And it's the funniest thing to watch. And the one way to kind of like give someone an understanding of it is if you've ever like gone to jump and like you're like almost like you like buckle. You buckled most likely because the eccentric velocity or eccentric load coming into it was so high, or the eccentric power was so high that the musculotendinous unit just like stopped. It didn't do anything. It actually stopped you from it rupturing. It's really, so it was like a safety mechanism for buckling, right? Mm-hmm. So that's what happens when the first time someone gets in the K box. Is like, hey, go slow and just build your speed, because as you build the speed, you'll build the rhythm. And the amount of times that you put people on that thing and you tell them go slow and they rip the first rep and they almost fall backwards, or they do fall backwards, is astounding. So we get better at coaching it for sure, but sometimes it's funny just to let people learn their lesson every once in a while, because you're not going to get hurt. It just freaks you out. And it freaks you out because it pulls you down so fast. And so that's kind of where you're getting like impulse and some of the other things, which I don't feel too qualified to talk on, but I know they do matter. But essentially, it's the amount of force over a time span is so much greater on the K box on the eccentric side than it is any other thing. The only thing that replicates it is plyos. And we both know you start adding too many plyos into people's programs and what happens? Stress fractures, tendonitis, just localized discomfort in certain areas. And so now you can start to build in this to hopefully prepare you better for the demands of maybe what coach might get them into and things like that. So.
Okay, there's a lot to digest, and that's why I like talking with you. So,
Yeah.
one, um, you talk about like RPEs being lower at comparable forces. Like, is there um, is there a soreness aspect that comes with this with the athletes? And then kind of an extension of that is like, do you use the K box in season, or is it more of an off season thing?
Both. First one, the soreness side, it's a super weird feeling. You're not sore necessarily unless you haven't trained. You're just tired. So that was like the one, like you're fatigued out. Like you're tired, you're fatigued. You're not like have like a super amount of soreness. Now that could be because you might like some people's range of motion gets limited because they don't have like weight forcing them down. So that could be the one thing maybe potentially. The other thing is, and I don't know what it is. Um, but my perceived soreness the day after is not as high as if I were to barbell train. Now, could that be because the loads aren't as high? Maybe. I couldn't tell you that. That'd be a good little study to take a look at. But we looked at comparable loads on force plates with comparable velocities, just to look at how to use velocity-based training. You would use the barbell and then use it on isoinertial training. And that's how we got our perceived efforts. So the outputs are very similar, right? But the perceived efforts were drastically lower. And I don't, it was definitely, it was a significant amount lower. Like, and I don't know what it was, is it 6% or more? But I mean, just being lower itself is still a win. And as you know, with a lot of athletes, anytime we get them to focus more on the actual sport and be able to use the weight room to complement them, the better. So that way you don't have to hear about it from whoever wants to come at you and be like, hey, they're sore, they couldn't do so and so. It's like, yeah, it's week one, man. Like it's gonna happen. They didn't do anything all summer, so it's not my fault.
Right.
As far as in season and off season, it works both. So two things. Typically, within strength and conditioning, we look at intensities and reps per set or volume to determine overload. Overload principle is pretty much how you create adaptation, right? Apply stress, go from there. So in gravity-based training, there's a certain amount of volume you need to hit. We could assume it's greater than 18 reps from the standpoint with warm-up sets to ever hit the intensities you need to hit in order to improve outputs. You can go as low as 12. Let's just go 12, okay? So most of us probably hang around 18 to 32. Why? Because that's kind of where we got Prelipin's chart and everything like that. Intensities that we work around are 70 to 85%. We all know that information. So now we've got to account for if volume accountability is the most important thing. Now we got to gauge intensity. I can't hit 80% until like the third set, maybe. Half the time when you get to 80%, you're not even warmed up for it either. So it's almost like a tester set, right? You're like, oh, how do I feel? It's like, well, if you hit 80% for one, and you come back and hit it again on say the fourth set, it's going to feel so much better. Why? It's because you're applying load to the cells and the body has to respond a certain way. Well, in order to increase the weight, to increase the force the body has to dish out or do, you have to rack the bar, put more weight on, and so. On the K box, I could just go slower or faster because the force generated on the eccentric side is based off the force on the concentric side. So you get to the top, and then the drive belt loops around the rod, and then it pulls you back down the eccentric side. So typically, when we K box, the first time you do it, it might be one set of 20. That's just the simple one, right? And then, as you know, the more times you touch the bar, the more times you prepare to go, the higher intensity is, right? I think Mel Siff and Super Training denoted that as the more times you get under the bar, the more taxing the session becomes. Probably because you're lifting one, more volume or more intensity, right? Either way, it's progressive overload. So you would use that the same way. In the off season, you would start at like 1x20, 2x10, 2x12. Well, the 1x20 is a good learning curve, or in the back end of, say, your barbell squatting, you just want to be able to expose them to the eccentric rate, the eccentric power side, or the rate of loading. On the flip side, in season, I don't need to do a 1x20 because I'm not trying to gain volume in season. Now that might be a 1x12, and because they've probably already trained on the K box for the last 6 months, so they know how to attack the first rep right away, and so they might be training at those higher intensities faster, or sooner. And so volume is still the same. We try to hit the same amount of volume that you might hit on barbell training. The difference is the first couple reps typically on K box, you're not at your max speed, so therefore you're not at the top intensity you need to be at. So I look at like kettlebell swings where you float 1 to 3 reps ahead of the amount of reps you want to be in. So if I wanted to hit somewhere between like 20 and 24 reps, I might hit like a 5x7. Right?
Makes
Because
sense. Yeah,
I'm
makes
probably going to
sense.
hit 5x4 to 5, somewhere between 20 and 24, 25 reps where I'm really at the loads I want to be at. So that's the only thing that really changes, at least in my opinion.
Gotcha. Yeah, to be honest, I love the K box. I love messing with it, and I've put like the super heavy wheel on and try to do like a set of 50 like RDLs on it, or like do the light one and just do like speed squatting. Like I've played around with it. I love it. It's weird that it's almost like an overlooked piece of equipment because it's so small and it can like easily collect dust in your corner. But then, like you said, you put people on it, and I've never put anyone on it and have them say they dislike it. I have
Mm-hmm.
had people say they feel weird, but once they get the rhythm of it, they're like, "Oh, I really like this." And like you said, the athletic people that I've worked with, when they get on, it just like clicks. It makes sense to them. Um, okay, so I know I said we wouldn't talk baseball, but I do want to talk about it because now I'm thinking about things for myself, and selfishly, I want to talk about it. So go ahead, before we
before
got dive into
before
baseball.
you move on, keep your thought. I think and this is like one of the underpinnings of like our jobs as professional, personal, woven in careers, right? Like I personally am so invested. These athletes are so invested into their like they're personally so invested into their professional piece, right? We're gonna call the collegiate athlete professional athletes essentially, right? The hours they put in, like this matters to them.
Yeah,
And so when they do something that makes them feel not athletic, they think I'm not athletic. And it's not that. It is you're just not used to timing, which, as we know, is a very athletic thing. Co-contraction, when to create force, when to push, when to hold, like those are athletic things, right? So I think that's what the K-box challenge is, more than anything else. It's sort of in plyos. You watch someone depth drop and they spin like 0.4 was it seconds on the ground. We know that's not sufficient enough to be a plyometric. And that is denoted by just the ground contact time, right? So they don't look athletic and they don't feel like it either. Now you take that box down and they start to get like that 0.2, 0.25 seconds on the ground and they just bound right back up and just naturally go. And so I think that's mostly what it is. They just don't like it because it makes them feel unathletic. We've been doing oscillatory work now, and that's the same concept I get with athletes is it doesn't feel athletic. I was like, because you look unathletic right now because you're struggling to figure out the timing. Once they figure out the time, they're like, oh, I like this.
hmm yeah, I
So
agree 100%. That's exactly what I've seen too.
yeah, go ahead, baseball.
No, no. And before that, like just it's funny to see when they don't feel athletic, they get like pissed off and then they're like, all right, I'm going to solve this. And then once they do, they love it. So, okay, so I'm in the professional baseball setting, hypothetically speaking here. We play every day and we travel a lot and there's a lot of just high intensity games. Like realistically, can you use this in season? For me, in this context, right? And I'm like thinking about, guys, if they come in sluggish, like just putting the light wheel on and like, having them rip some like quick, quarter squats on there, or, if our starting pitchers have a few days in between starts, like using it a little heavier with the bigger wheel, the slower speeds. And then the other side of this too, obviously we've talked about only lower body, but like the upper body aspect of rotating in and out with I think they call it the K pulley, the one that goes on the
Yeah.
wall.
I used it
Um,
today in my men's basketball team on roads, and they're like, "This is cool. Like
yeah,
this feels
yeah. So
cool."
like, do you see like, is there a vision that, and I'm putting you on the spot here, so like, you don't have to give me the whole breakdown of a program, but like, is there a way that that fits into that kind of setting, or is this more of like you'd probably need some days off in between? And I guess the same is probably true with barbell, right? Like if I load the barbell up, the stimulus is different than if I put an empty bar on my back and jump with it. So like I would assume there's probably some way, and my wheels are spinning about it. So I want to
Yeah.
hear your thoughts.
So two things. Um, First is I think the K box serves as the bridge between normal barbell strength training and ballistic style training. And the reason why is because it creates a greater eccentric power piece or a greater eccentric load at a faster speed. So we already know plyos blow people up if it's done too much volume or if the surface is too hard, which is actually very common. You hear, think of field hockey, lacrosse, anyone who plays on a field, and just think of preseason. What is always blowing up? It's always the same stuff.
Mhm.
And you go and look at their field and you're like, this is the hardest turf I've ever been on. Right? You get teams that play on grass and practice on grass, they don't have those issues. It's not the same thing because it's more compliant surface, which is a little bit easier on the tendon. You can allow a little greater loading, things like that. So that's where I think the K box really comes into play, is just allowing the body to naturally. I think Milan Jovanovic posted something, and then William Whalen did the push versus pull method in programming. This is more like a pull method, right? I'm going to allow the body to just respond to training naturally, and let's gain our volume over the course of days versus in one day. And that kind of brings me to what we've talked about with how you like to program. I'm not going to say it, but I really like how you guys break it down, and really, for me, like stimulates my mind in terms of like, oh, we have solutions now, because we have a lot of problems, but we don't have a lot of solutions. And I'm a big firm believer in, if you can create more solutions, or at least have solutions, viable solutions to the problems you're going to run into, at least you have basis to make decisions. And at least we can go from there versus the I don't know, let me think on it. Um, so um, let's make a scenario, because I think this would be a little bit better, a little more practical applied. Let's use a pitcher. So 6-day rotation or 5-day rotation? Remind me.
5.
5. Okay. So what's the day after? The day after routine? Let's just. It's probably a general day, right?
Well,
Uh,
so yeah, so let's say, so generally speaking, there's two schools of thought here in professional baseball that I've heard of. So one is the day after you pitch is lower body. The second day is an upper and a bullpen. The third is some sort of total body or circuit training or something of that nature. And then the fourth is usually sprints or med balls or plyo, something to prime for the start the next day. The other school of thought is you pitch today, your day one is much more recovery based. Maybe you get in a pool, maybe you do some like FRC type of stuff, like looking to regain range of motion. Day two is either a total body or a lower body. Day three is, again, either a movement day or an upper if you did lower the day before. Day four, some sort of plyo sprint, something to prime you for the next day. So depending on, again, the age of the starting pitcher, the wear and tear on their body, even the part of the season, like if they end up having a really long stretch without any extra days or days off from the field, all of that is factored in, obviously. And we all do that, I think, regardless of our programming and our setting. We look at the schedule, we look at the person, we look at the history. But let's say, for the sake of this, day one is a recovery day, day two is a total body day three is some sort of movement circuit day four is sprinting and med balls, and then they pitch. Is that a fair layout for this one?
yeah, cool. Yeah, I think it goes. So background for upper lower days. Let's be honest. Traditionally, it works because it works with the high low system or the high low model. Like upper body training is a low intensity thing. So here's my issue with the first one you have. If you do lower body after a start, you're trying to consolidate stress. Okay. We know motor recruitment is going to be a lot higher in lower body days than upper body days. It's just how it is. So if you pitch lower body and then you throw a bullpen, you got 3 high days in a row. Unless you're actually not attacking your lower body day. So now you're just applying stress to an already under recovered individual. So what are you truly accomplishing? Okay. That's my piece professionally. Personally, I think day after, and this is where so if I had to put a kit together and I was in Major League Baseball, this is what I would put together. I would have, if I had a budget and I could travel with things, you would do K-Box Light. You would do the small force decks, traveling force plates to be able to quantify stuff. That's gold budget, right? Or your diamond level budget. You'd probably have 1 or 2 kettlebells. People hate ankle weights, but they can work really well. You probably need half pounders, probably all the way to 2 pounders, and then 0.5 increments, which doesn't take up a lot of weight or space or like weight or load to carry. And then if you could take a kettlebell or med ball, I could either do either one. You can either throw med balls or swing kettlebells. It's a ballistic component. I don't really care. They swing bats and throw baseball. Like they're doing ballistic things all the time, right? Okay. So that would be my gold standard. And then if you had power blocks for overloading, you could do that. Here's the thing we're going to do. You're on the road for what? 7 days, and then you're back home for 7 days if you're in the minor leagues. Anything besides the pros. And the pros, you typically go 3 to 5 days of a series, and then you travel back either to a new location or back home. So you have to look at your opportunities to load. Your opportunities to load are not on the road. Those are the opportunities to maintain outputs. Outputs are easy. You're chasing certain qualities. You got force at slow speeds, force at moderate speeds, and force at fast speeds. Slow speeds, you could do K-Box if you have high wheels. You could also do some type of oxidative training where you're hitting like volume split squats, right? Where time under tension is the goal. Think of Quadrant System by Daniel Bove. Qualities resource. I'm plugging so many people. You have force at moderate speeds, right? That's essentially slow stress shortening cycle, like med ball throws, kettlebell swings, things that don't involve a rapid plyomet or a rapid stress shortening cycle, right? That could be K-Box as well with a larger wheel. Okay. Then you have force at fast speeds, sprinting, throwing, light objects, bounding or like hopping, things at ground contact times are a lot faster or the rate of contraction is vastly higher. You can do it on K-Box too with the medium or small wheel based on how strong the athlete is. Now, that's force. Now, you also have force at no speed, which is like an isometric, which if you do long yielding ISOs, it's probably more of recovery base, loading strategy, maybe a little more tendon compliance, or just trying to drive load into areas. And isometric typically, from what it sounds like, are lower on the inflammatory process side. So hopefully there's less soreness and less residual fatigue for 24 hours. That's where the FRC model comes into play, right? That's what it's geared around. Control articular rotations, yielding isometrics. If you really want to train that day, hit low level overcoming ISOs or pushing ISOs, which you can do in the K-Box, find a wall. You could do manual resistance if you're looking at shoulder care. Like, so those are your ISO options as well. So you have about 5 options of things, and all you're trying to drive is physiological change or progressive overload to some degree, or just load them so they're robust enough to actually load with external weight when you get back to your home facility, right? Like think through the process. It's 133 games at AAA, and some of those guys play at the major league level, so they're gonna be 100. They're gonna play 162, right? Here and there, right? And those guys that are at the major league, they gotta play baseball. So let's bring it back. Let's start day one after start. I'm thinking you do active recovery, mobility via cars, and then some cyclical movement and or isometric loading in general. Why? Low inflammatory process, get into in ranges of motion, prepare yourself for the next day, right? Things that we all know, but it has to be active recovery. Passive recovery, I don't think works unless the turnaround time needs to be in the next 48 hours. So World Series, this guy throws, off day, he's throwing again. That we know that scenario, right? Like we all sit down at the table, we say, should this happen? And the athlete says, I'm throwing. And coach says yes. Trainer says yes. PT says yes. Strength coach says, sounds good. And we all get them ready, right? That's not a thing you're going to be doing in June, right? Come back on that second day or the you call it 2 days after. I think you do slow stretch shortening cycle and your greatest strength work. So full range of motion the best you can, highest volume or highest loaded intensity. Now remember, we're talking about force at slow speeds, not force at fast speeds. If you want to do force at fast speeds, you're probably looking like rudiment series, like hopping, skipping, more neuromuscular control things than you are output. So I'd probably do more single leg, like hopping for time, jump rope, alternating. Fucking bring out the agility ladder. I don't give a shit. Like let them skip and hop through that thing. You use it as a warm up. It's coordination. We already talked about how athletes don't want to feel unathletic. Low hanging fruit, man. Especially with pitchers. Some of those guys are so good, but so bad when they get off the bump, and it's sad. Because I'm like, dude, you throw, as you say, rocket fuel, and you look like a baby deer when we're out in the outfield doing skills and drills. Also, so your heavy loading day, that might be a day we do a little bit ESD work, maybe some tempos, things like that, right? Just get the blood flowing. Come back the next day, you could theoretically increase the intensity of the isos that following day. You could do maybe like overcoming isos and light capacities. So not hitting your max threshold for volume, but you can hit some little bit of intensity on that day 3 to prime you for that following day, which will be a ballistic output day. So if you don't want to do that, you can always put the overcoming isos, the pushing isos on the ballistic output day. Why? What you're looking for is max motor recruitment and fast speeds, both of which are the same. If you're doing plyos, you're not looking for low threshold work. Let's just say that. You're looking to improve the output, the neural output of the body. Therefore, you use plyos because it's a great display of that quality. Well, isometric works really well. You could then use the K-box to do isometric pushes. So you would just hold the athlete in about 15 degrees of knee flexion. So now the tool you're using is also how you implement the drill, right, or the exercise. You can then have them go into, say it's an athlete that doesn't respond to jumping really well, you can have them go into light wheel shallow squats, mimicking the range of motion they're going to hit, and they have to rapidly concentrically push, and there's a rapid eccentric loading. But because the foot doesn't leave the K-box, there's no preparation for ground contact. Now, are you getting the bang for your buck in terms of the eccentric side that you would get in the plyos? No. But we've made a decision that this athlete doesn't respond to plyos really well at this time, but we're going to prepare them to get to that eventually. So it's used as a tool to get athletes to what we think training should look like, but also it can be used for those athletes that just don't respond to traditional training, whether you have years on your life or years on your body from playing, or just generally like, I just don't like doing that, or my body doesn't respond favorably to that because I didn't train in the off season, whatever have you, right? So yeah, I think that's the way you can do it. Big ranges of motion, moderate loads at slow speeds, or force at slow speeds on that 2 days after. You can do like a little bit greater speed and output on that would be a day before, I believe. And you would just pair that with your sprints and jumps. And it doesn't have to be super complicated. Big ranges of motion after the start, and then shorter ranges of motion as you get closer and closer, at least under like output or load, right? Because the other thing people don't realize is they're going to go throw a bullpen. And guess what? That's not a light day.
Correct.
Now you start theming those things together, because here's the thing people don't realize, and I get it, it can work. Gone are the days where you just tell people that, hey, you just got to run yourself into the ground and see what happens. That's not a thing anymore. We have to be able to articulate to our athletes, to the individuals we're talking to, on how it makes them better, why it makes them better, and then what we need from them. And so if their side day that they're going out and throwing needs to be at a certain intensity, well, we could gauge that based off speed of the baseball. Well, if we're going to go ask them to hit a hard day in the weight room and the bar is 60%, like that's not really lining up if they're going to then have to go maximally throw, right? And ideally they do technical work before they would do non-technical work too. So, yeah. Also, like you do split squats, RDLs, or just bilateral squatting on the K box too, which is nice. Or a staggered stance, more rapid, shallower pieces. But yeah, that's traditionally how I would probably train it. 2 total body days mixed in. You can always do upper body stuff every day. It's usually your arm care stuff that is what we're talking about, and I would do that through isolated training or integrated cuff work, whatever that might look like for that individual specifically.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've got a bunch of ideas that are just spinning in my head right now. No pun intended with the K box spin, but yeah, I just think it's a really cool piece of equipment. I think it's really valuable. Like for me, like I said, I get on there and I like test shit out all the time for myself. And sometimes it's high reps, sometimes it's heavy weight, sometimes it's moving fast, moving slow, or even like within the own set, like within my own set of like go slow, go fast, go like challenging myself to go at different speeds. And the one thing that you said there that I it kind of like made me think of is we've had guys that we've put on there that have knee issues that don't like jumping and they love the K box and they really like find value in it. Um, and I don't know, it to me it almost feels like a nice appropriate substitute or maybe something that's even better than just jumping sometimes. And I don't know, I want to implement it more. I saw a video the other day of somebody using the 3D strap with it and like
Yeah,
having doing some rotational drills with it, and I'm like, man, this is interesting. Like, there's just a lot of ways to use it, and I don't know if it's because people are uneducated on it or they think it's not like as valuable as it is, or it's just I don't know. Like, I haven't really heard a lot of people talk about the value of the K box to the extent that we're talking about, and I mean you. Like I just haven't heard people really explain
no.
it well. You know what I mean? And it's like if people knew what this was and what it does, I think it would become much more mainstream, and maybe it will at some point. And then it'll get butchered and bastardized, and then we'll have to find another piece of equipment to make
Yeah,
worthwhile. You know what I mean? But I don't know. There's just something about it that I've always been drawn to, and I love training on it. And it's just, I don't know if I've just been scared to pull the trigger on it, or it gets lost in the shuffle of other things. But I keep thinking back to like, there's really a lot of value in this little piece of equipment, and I really think there are more people that could benefit from using it. So I'm appreciating all of your thoughts on it because I think this is really good content.
yeah, and I think the other thing too is just like barbells. There's different rep schemes to use, things like that. But like mostly, I think the reason why people don't like it is because they don't know how it functions. They don't know how to use it. So I traveled to baseball, the University of Kentucky, and my baseball team at the time, I believe that was that'd have been the year of COVID. So like that was probably our best offseason we've had, right? That was probably our best team that we were gonna have in a long. We had built the pieces we needed, right? And we go to Kentucky and we play them, and we were winning through like 8 innings or 7 innings or something like that. And then they started putting in all their good guys, and it was not good. Like they were had weekend starters coming because they're not gonna lose to some OVC team on a midweek game. This is not how it's gonna work. They're gonna do everything they can to win, and they came back and win and whatever. But the day before we trained. And so everyone's got their squat pattern, right? We have front squat, back squat, goblet squat based off where you're at in the progression. And it's just landmark checkpoints, right? If there's a guy that wants to stay on goblet squat, that's fine. When we rank, record, and publish, and your name's at 36 on the team, and you don't care, it's your scholarship eventually, right? At your guys' level, if that guy's not producing, it's their contract. So I'm not in the business of trying to get you to try harder if you don't want it. I got 35 other guys I need to invest into, right? So, anyways, I'm talking to Ryan DeVrent because he at the time didn't know like much about it, and I just stood there. I said, "Come do 1x20 in the K box when it's open." And we had a medium wheel on there. Some guys came before they started their set. Some guys came after the first set. Some guys came after they finished all their sets. And I think we had 4x4 to 6 is a typical progression I would use. Just because if you chew off too much than you can, then you can at least hit 4. We know if it feels heavy, relative intensity is all we're chasing there. but we needed to keep a high eccentric stimulus around because I knew we weren't going to sprint that week, and we weren't going to do a couple other things. And we knew at the time that it was such a beneficial piece of equipment. So I don't care where you get it in, you just need to get it in. We got all 20 guys in on the K box for at least one set by the end of the workout. And everyone's like, well, where's it fit? I mean, have you guys seen Cal Dietz's new training model? He's got like 17 exercises on the first set. And it's just to keep athletes busy for the most part. And you have the things that are looking for output, but the rest of us just kind of just getting volume in on some couple other things. And there's definitely qualities that he's looking to train. I don't know that much about it, but at face value, it looks like, oh, you're just doing nothing. And that's not the case. It's just how he structures it to make sense with what he wants. And people don't understand how to put the K box in there because they only see A1s, A2s, and you're going to pair upper and lower body together. They don't see, oh, A1 is K box, and because the outputs are so high, well, maybe I need to go work on hip flexion, right? I'm not getting hip flexion. So let's use half kneeling hip flexion liftoffs out of the FRC model. And we're gonna accumulate 30 seconds because that's what the protocol says total. Okay, that's A2. A3, let's go work on ankle dorsiflexion because we know we're not getting maximum ability to that. Let's work through eccentric neural grooving out of the FRC model, right? Fantastic. Okay. Now on your fourth one, right? Maybe let's hit some shoulder prehab. Let's hit full swimmers or axial rotations out of the shoulder, right? Okay. Now you have 4 exercises built into that. And let's go to the fifth one. Whatever you want it to be, I don't care. I'm just giving you options. Maybe it's adductor, isometric work, so Copenhagen, or just a side plank in general, right? So now you've built an A1 through A5 series that doesn't take away from the first exercise. It complements it in terms of preparing globally the tissues that we need, ultimately knowing that we have a limited amount of time, a limited amount of space, and a limited amount of guys that can be on this machine at once. So I'm going to build something that works for me. At our facility, we used to do quad sets. At SIU, we had 7 racks and 9 platforms, and I'd have to train 35 guys in an hour. We had 4 exercises per tier once we finished speed and power work. And so your B series and your C series, so you get 8 exercises total, split into two groups of 4. It works great because everyone knew what they needed to do. So it's just mass chaos. But without that experience, I don't think I would have understood how it works. And so what people don't like about the K-Box is because, oh, it's not axial loading or it's not barbell loading. Cool. We talked about that. It's force, right? Force output. That's all you're looking at. It doesn't hit the range of motion I want. I just gave you options for FRC. They have a system, run the system, take the certification. It's great. I'm giving you all the options. I'm giving you solutions. You just don't like the answers. And that's okay. You might get there eventually and you might not. But either way, if I had to go be with baseball, I have a program at least that I could run. And I feel like it would improve the outputs that we needed to, or at least keep the guys prepared to play. So that way, when we get back to actual normal training, quote unquote, we have that opportunity, right?
Yeah, I think that's kind of how like that's how I look at it in the minor leagues. Like, especially with the new schedule they have, is like you spend a set week on the road at one place, you spend a set week at home. Like, really trying to push the training on the road for me has always, like, since they switched the schedule and made it so clear cut, it's been like, well, why don't you just do the heavier stuff at home when you have accessibility to your equipment and you're in familiar confines, and then when you're on the road and you have to train in a hallway or on the field in the outfield, like, why don't we just do some stuff that includes like throwing med balls, jumping, and then obviously to an extent here, like, the K box it fits in perfectly in that kind of window. And I like the system that you're presenting there of just like, I think to the outside it might look like organized chaos or maybe unorganized chaos. I don't know, but like to you understand, and your group of athletes understands, like, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing. And then when we get back home, like, because some guys are, everybody in baseball comes from a different background, right? And some guys are really old, some guys are really young, some guys are Latin, some guys are American, or some guys come from Japan. Like, everybody has a different training background, and there are a lot of American guys that come through the college system that like to lift heavy, right? And when you go on the road, they don't have availability. Like, it's almost like dangling the carrot, like, hey, when we get back home, like, I'll let you let it eat on the squat rack, but while we're on the road, I need you to cover these things. Like, and that's always made sense to me. And I think that kind of keeps a check on guys from like just crushing themselves all the time, and getting quality work in and like maintaining athleticism. Like I would agree back to our very first point is like you look at it and you're like, how can we do this better in our given situation? And like I've really been having my own wheels spin a lot on just what minor league development looks like, and obviously being in the big leagues, like what the big league training looks like, and can we do this just a little bit better? And that makes a difference in the game. It really does.
Yeah, and I think like I don't know, like I like Charlie Weingroff. K-Lox is essentially a lateralization to maybe the squat pattern, but it's a lateralization that merges into the final goal. And here's the thing: you tell someone they can't do something from an athletic standpoint, man, you're taking pretty much their identity away if you think about it, unless they don't care. So no, it's not that you can't do it. You might just not be able to do it right now. Doesn't mean you can't do it or you won't ever get back to it. So you deal with kids with like pain and stuff like that. Like, hey, we gotta keep this kid strong, improve this quality. Like these guys gotta be prepared to play. And I think that's what the K box does for you faster. And there's some research they published and things like that, looking at like it's a little more efficient in terms of cross sectional area and things like that. Now, I don't I didn't do the study. I can't write off on that as all, but as 100%. So don't put my name on that. But they cite things all the time with that, or at least they did originally. But being prepared to play is the more important thing. And so if we talk about hey plyos and sprinting blow kids up, how to prepare something close to that? Well, if K-Box is that answer, then do it. And everyone always has this issue. We had an athlete at SIUE had couldn't participate. Had some things that weren't working well. Had some pains. Very skeptical with what we were asking to do with the K box. And he got on. I think we did 3 wheels, the 3XL wheels. Like you and I both know, that thing pulls you down, and you are moving slow as could be. I think he was stuck at like it was in the 6s or something like that, low 6s on squat, like 605. Big dude. Um, was a I can't say name, but was not a small human to say the least. And we don't have football, so you could imagine what sport he played. And didn't back squat for 4 months, something like that. So all through fall, we K-box twice a week, heavy load. Didn't barbell deadlift either. Didn't do anything like that. No axial loading outside the harness for the K-box. We come back and he hits like 625 or 635 on squat and had more in the tank. We were just like, you're done. Like we've accomplished what we wanted to do. Previously, the last 2 years of barbell training, he had improved by like 5-10 pounds. That is a lot of load on the body. That's a lot of work on the body for it not to improve that much, right? Okay, so that's his. I have my own actual situation. I took one of the K boxes. I used one of the K boxes during COVID. We did oxidative training, which if you know Joel Jameson, it's 5 seconds down, 5 seconds, like the most brutal training ever, right? And you pick upper, lower, split squat, so push up, row, split squat. We did hamstring curl and one other one. I can't remember what it was. That was one day. We always did it consistently for the period that we were out. And then a K box. I did one heavy day and one lighter day. Heavy day, I would do 5 sets of 6, XL wheel, or XL wheel essentially. And then on the lighter day, I would do either medium or large based on how I felt, which is half the weight, if not more, like 70% of the total inertia of the XL wheel. And I would just do a little bit higher volume, right? So 3 sets of 12 instead of 5 sets of 6, right? Hit the same volume, but allow the rep scheme to dictate the outputs I would have. We go in the facility first day back. I put 435 on the trap bar. It was nothing. Like it just moved. And I was like, oh, okay, this thing works. Like it's not hard. We make this so complicated though. It's like, what are you chasing? Can you create a goal out of it? And then how do we train that thing and allow the athlete to, one, receive the load or the stress and then be able to recover to perform again? It's you got to be prepared to play essentially. And so that was my pretty cool experience, and pretty much anyone that's actually dove into it, I think, has found similar responses. But it's not something you just dip your toe in, right? Because you don't have enough data points or enough time to dip your toe in. Once you see it actually being utilized, you're like, okay, I see this working, and I don't really want to go back the other way. Um, and so usually my first introduction to the K box for everybody is curls, because they cannot believe how a one set of 20 with a medium wheel blows them up more than doing 100 total reps. They're like, why is it so, like, I feel like I got balloons.
I'm so glad you brought that up because that's so true.
It's crazy. But think about it. Like, your biceps, unless you do drop catches with curls, have never eccentrically loaded to that rate. They just haven't. And so it's a different stimulus. You apply a different stimulus, the body has a natural response. That is, oh, I need to do something. This is the alarm stage, right? Like, that's how adaptation works. So yeah, bicep curls is the first thing I always introduce,
Same.
because people are like, no, I can't. And then the other thing is one of my old graduate assistants loved like higher volume work, like 8 to 15 reps for like 5 to 8 sets. Like, just love the stuff. And I was like, let's just do chest supported row on the K pulley, put the large wheel on. And at set 2, he said, my lats are cramping. I don't know, like I can only do 3 sets today. It's too much. He did 45 reps that day. And he was like, I can't explain this. Like, the amount of like I guess hypertrophy he was feeling, or like the pooling of blood in his lats was so great, because he's never received that amount of load within that. And so, yeah, in that, I mean, we've just been talking about lower body, but upper body's great. Like, I like doing a front foot lead, low to high row, for a lot of baseball guys to look at like front side, like blocking, right? Now, you're not looking at the pelvis coming around, but lead leg being in a negative foot shin angle and putting force in the ground is still a trait you probably like to do. Well, you put one foot on the K box and you row it at an angle, and there you go. You could do bent over rows in the K box too. Like, there's so many options that you can do on that thing. And it just pretty much fills the things that we like to do. And outside that, you just use FRC to fill in the gaps, and you sprint and jump. I don't see it working the other way and without that, but it's way better option than lugging around 500 pounds of kettlebells and med balls and shit. Like, this sounds terrible. Hey, here's my trunk of training equipment. Like, or you just put the K box in the trunk, and it's, I think, 24 pounds compared to this 100 plus you're going to bring.
Oh yeah.
And
minor league trunks get so heavy.
Yeah. And I don't blame, like, it has to,
Yeah.
it has to.
We my introduction is curls and skull crushers. Like, we'll have somebody stand on it. We'll have somebody stand on it, and then you lay down on the bench. They hand you the thing. It's a whole thing. It's like a whole, but when people feel it there, they're like, whoa, like, that's wild. And you're like, yeah, imagine what this does for your legs now.
So I'll throw this at you and see what you think. So, have you noticed how pullovers are kind of making a comeback?
Yeah.
Okay. So you understand Bondarchuk's model, right? GPE, SPE, SDE, CE. So if throwing is like with javelin here, like pullovers are like pinnacle for us in training. Like, they are a big thing that has carryover. Typically, like Zach's put out a lot of good stuff as far as like the med ball throws, and you track it. If that's our CE in the weight room, let's just say that's our CE in the weight room, and let's build it back. Well, high volume pullovers is probably your GPE, right? Build the pattern. Maybe that's lat pull down. It's general, right? It's something that is similar to, maybe that's fallouts, TRX fallouts, something that gets you overhead in a length of lat position, which, by the way, is my new favorite thing. Length and lat position might be one of my most favorite things, because we don't ever work on it. But no one's getting hurt at shortened or at mid range. They're always getting hurt at lengthened ranges and shortened ranges. So work on it at length. So load at length is what I call it. And then in the next block, you might do like an easy curl bar pullover where you get a little bit more load on it. and you kind of get a little more hip drive into it. And then the K-Go or the K-Pulley is your SDE because it's very similar to the med ball. It is very similar to the speeds on the eccentric loading side as well. And it puts them on a bench. So now they don't have to control necessarily the thorax, just like everything else, right? They can really just work on the output. You could theoretically do the loaded throws too, like with the medicine ball and the physio ball, but you would have to do a partner pass. So there's ways it fits in too, within the scheme of like the pullover, because it's kind of making a comeback right now and with a lot of throwing sports, and rightfully so. I mean, it trains the lat at length, it trains the overhead position, and it requires a fairly aggressive concentric action forward, which pec, lat, internal rotators, it's kind of important to prepare. So yeah, sorry, that's one thing we've been working on a little bit, and it's fun because Jab is who I work with now, and that's kind of like my baseball piece. But they're just, I mean, they're 215 pounds, and I got a kid that hopefully throws like 72, 73 meters this year, if not further. Like they want to be big.
Yeah, yeah, they're
It's like
nasty.
pitchers that eat enough food actually.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny because the other day Karen and I were at the gym, and I introduced the pullover to her, and I was like, "This is how you throw gas," and she was like, "Really?" I'm like, "Well, one, I'm half joking, half not joking," and then she was like, "Oh, but why do I need to throw gas? Why am I doing this?" And I'm like, "You don't. That's not the point here." But no, yeah, yes, separately to the whole conversation, like the pullover does like seem to it does seem to be making a comeback in the circles where for a while it was like banned exercise number two right behind anything overhead press.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, I think, dude, this has been a really awesome talk. And if anything, people are going to see like the kind of depth of conversations that we have. And I know this could go on forever and ever. And at some point, I'll probably have you on to talk about a different topic. But thank you for sharing all of the information. I appreciate your friendship. I appreciate bouncing ideas off of you. Before we close it down, anything that we missed on the K box? Any final thoughts? Any closing remarks?
Yeah, I think you would, and I don't know if we correctly displayed this, but you would follow the same loading principles you would with barbell training. It doesn't really change what you do, it just changes how you do it, which I think when you view it that way, it's not as um, challenging. It's just like, hey, here's an option, see what you think. Um, if you're gonna do 3 sets of 10 in your first block of training with barbell, do that. Like it's okay. But just progress it accordingly because you need more sets to improve or increase the intensity you're going to be training at, right? So yeah, that's one thing that was super interesting with kind of the evolution of it. And honestly, I would just encourage people to try it. I'm a big fan of like drop sets with a lot of athletes. Instead of hitting some of these higher intensity work, like let's just hit it for the neural output, drop set, to 60% or less, and just get our volume in that way. After we did the work, unless someone takes forever to warm up, and then I'll probably put it on the front end of the workout. So we'll use that a lot of times as like, hey, we're bilaterally squatting today. Maybe it's safety bar squat, and then you're gonna K-box split squat to challenge more so that eccentric deceleration piece. Or hey, we're gonna go heavy 3-point row. I want you to hit the hundos for a set of 5 on your top set, and then I want you to come over and rip this medium wheel on the K pulley for a set of 8 to 12 and just really overload them that way, right? So it doesn't really change what you do; it just changes how you do it, which I think is a beauty in which our careers are created. Is the Dunning Kruger effect, right? I know there's way more options, but we just have to consistently think through like, does it make sense globally? And I think it does. You just might have to reframe some things because we do a lot of good stuff. It's just can be a little better.
Maybe we'll put together a resource on it or something. Who knows? But,
Hey,
buddy, I appreciate your time. It's always great to catch up with you. Have a good Thanksgiving if I don't see you before then, and we'll talk soon.
I appreciate you. Thanks for having me on. It was fun.